George Floyd's struggles in life were the culmination of the centuries-long oppression of Black people in this country. What have we learned in the year since his death? I'm Dometi Pongo, and this is MTV News Need to Know. It was 1 year ago today, on May 25th, 2020, when former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin knelt on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. The videotaped murder in the midst of a global pandemic resulted in a widespread racial reckoning across the country. America grappled with its racist origins. Communities took down nearly 100 Confederate monuments. Companies addressed diversity issues in the corporate sector. And hundreds of thousands took to the streets to denounce the systematic killing of Black people by police. The movement was worldwide. Floyd's death served as a catalyst that mobilized oppressed people across the globe as they too confronted harmful power structures. But what was often lost in the conversation was an understanding of who George Floyd was as a person. While his death underscored the epidemic of police brutality against Black Americans, the circumstances of his life shed light on the systemic oppression that allows for it. George Floyd was the descendant of formerly enslaved Africans in North Carolina tobacco farms. And even after his great-great-grandfather acquired 500 acres of land after the Civil War, it was stolen by white farmers. As the Washington Post reported, this was a legally questionable practice that Black landowners at the time often dealt with. And the fact that this freed man was not truly free affected the Floyds for generations to come. George Floyd was born in 1973, just 5 years after the murder of Martin Luther King Jr. He grew up in a rundown public housing complex which concentrated Black homeowners into segregated neighborhoods through redlining. In these places, social options and opportunities for economic advancement were limited. Floyd had the opportunity to go to college and play football. He even had dreams of getting drafted into the NFL, like his cousin Steven Jackson, who was scouted by the NBA. But Floyd had to drop out, unable to juggle his studies, practice, and supporting his mom and siblings. And when he returned home, he became trapped in a vicious cycle. Floyd got in trouble with police for drug-related incidents, diminishing his job prospects, which led to more drug-related incidents, starting the cycle all over again. The Washington Post reported that one conviction, a $10 drug deal that earned him 10 months behind bars, is now under review because the arresting officer is suspected of fabricating evidence in dozens of low-level drug cases. But even though federal data proves that white and Black Americans use drugs at the same rate, Black people are disproportionately targeted. Police patrol our neighborhoods and arrest us for the same drugs that white people use, largely consequence-free. Floyd spent a quarter of his adult life in jail. He began living with addiction after being prescribed opiates for back pain, exacerbating his challenges. With few work prospects given his record, he fell into a cycle of despair before eventually serving a 4-year sentence for aggravated robbery. Upon his release, his church pastor suggested he get a fresh start. He moved to Minneapolis and became a security guard, enrolled in a rehab program, trained to become a commercial truck driver, and encouraged young people to rid their lives of guns and drugs. Big Floyd, as he was affectionately known, was described as a gentle giant and a loving family man. And in fact, Darnella Frazier, the teenager who captured Floyd's murder on her cell phone, said, "When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad. I look at my brothers. I look at my cousins, my uncles. That could have been one of them." In the years since Floyd's death, the world saw mass action for Black lives that sometimes resembled the civil rights movement decades ago. Black and young voters showed up to the polls last November in record numbers. Derek Chauvin was found guilty of murder, and Americans began understanding how interconnected race is to nearly everything in our society. But even as we saw these small victories, there were more police killings and new bills restricting voting access introduced in 24 states. While the arc of history might bend toward justice, it can only do so as long as we're the ones steering it. Remember that George Floyd, as the descendant of enslaved people and sharecroppers whose little hope of building generational wealth was stolen from them, was a victim of white supremacist structures. What happened on May 25th last year didn't start when the camera turned on. It's the result of generations of violence and exploitation against Black people that our country has yet to fully reckon with. It's on us to make sure we harness this momentum to build a better and radically different future. I'm Dometi Pongo, and that's what you need to know.